And you said something which caught my attention, that when you were in college and developing these skills, you wanted to do some things that were of benefit to humanity. Why did you think that?
Well,
because not everyone does.
Yeah, no, I guess it was, I had sort of an existential crisis of like, what does it all mean, and what's the meaning, what's the meaning of life, and
was this 3 a.m. over a beer, or this was more serious?
Probably goes back to high school, I guess. I don't want to give a laboriously long answer, but I was, I had sort of a dark childhood. It wasn't good. Probably partially brought on by reading some of the philosophers. Like, don't ever read Schopenhauer and Nietzsche if you're 14. It's not good.
Yeah, or Ayn Rand either. Too.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was just trying to figure out what does it all mean, and actually. When I read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I think is a great work of philosophy, that sort of highlighted the point that very often the issue is understanding what questions to ask. And if you can properly frame the question, then the answer is the easy part. So I thought things that expand the scope and scale of the human consciousness and allow us to better ask questions and achieve greater enlightenment, those were good things. And so that's sort of what can we do that's going to most likely lead to that outcome. And so obviously we have to, the internet is an important element to that, because the internet is like, it's like the world acquiring a nervous system. All of a sudden, you can be anywhere. If you have an internet connection, you have access to the cumulative knowledge of humanity. It's pretty incredible. I mean, you have access to more information than the Library of Congress through your iPhone. I want to be part of, put a small brick in the construction of that edifice, and that's why the internet, and then sustainable energy, because, well, tautologically, if it's not sustainable, we're going to hit a wall, even if one considers the environmental issues to be non-existent. In fact, you could say, for the sake of argument, that CO2 is beneficial. Let's assume it's beneficial. By the way, I think that would be a bad assumption. All respect to Chevron. And then, even if you assume that the United States has every drop of oil in the world, well, we still need to get off oil eventually, because what will happen is that scarcity will drive the price up, leading to economic collapse. And so my interest in electric vehicles goes back to college, before global warming became a real issue. But I think the environmental issues do add additional urgency to the matter. It's simply unwise to run an experiment on how much CO2 the ocean's atmosphere can absorb.
Yes, yes. Let me ask one other question about, again, you and how you got to this point in life. One reason people read biographies of accomplished people is to get more clues, more data points on how it happened, what the steps were along the road. Many people come out of college and can't find a job. You've invented several entire new industries or companies. What do you think made you the way you are, and what can be extrapolated? Could other people learn from your example to date?
I think I need to sort of put some thought into that and say what lessons can be drawn, because I'm so usually in the thick of things I haven't really put a lot of time into abstracting what lessons can be most helpful. But I mean, the way I tend to view problems is from a physics standpoint. I think physics is a good analytical framework. And one of the key things in physics is to reason from first principles. This is contrary to the way most human reasoning takes place, which is by analogy. Reasoning from first principles just means that you figure out what are the fundamental truths or things that people are pretty sure are fundamental truths, and can you build up to a conclusion from that, from those principles, and then certainly if you come up with some idea and it appears to violate one of those fundamental truths, then you're probably wrong, or you should get a really big prize or something like that. So this may seem like, I don't know, it may seem sort of obvious when it's explained, but it's actually not what people do. Reasoning by analogies is helpful because it's a shortcut.
Yeah.
And it's mostly correct, but it tends to be most incorrect when you're dealing with new things, because it's hard to analogize to something really new.
Let me now shift to the areas where your businesses are now operating. You have a solar power company, obviously. You have the electric cars, and you have space. And so let's talk about each of those areas. Give us, if you would, what you think the potential of solar power is, and your general, you were making your point about the importance of addressing sustainability and energy. How you think people should think about energy now, about solar energy and more broadly?
Sure. Well, I think solar power will be the single biggest source of electricity, at least in the United States, by the midpoint of the century. And that may seem like a bold statement given the tiny percentage that it generates right now, which is on the order of sort of 1%, or less than 1% really. But if you look at the growth rate of solar, that's where it's gonna go. This compound growth is incredibly powerful. But I think anything we can do to accelerate that growth is a good thing, because it means we'll have power as long as the sun shines. And if the sun doesn't shine, we have larger issues. So I think that's a good way to go. And actually, the Earth is almost entirely solar powered today. The only reason we're not a frozen ice ball at around 4 Kelvin, maybe 3 Kelvin, is because of the sun. And so all the precipitation, the weather system, almost everything is solar powered. The ecosystem is solar powered. So it's really just about taking a little bit of that solar power and turning that into electricity, which people could use.
And is there a way to explain concisely, in terms I might understand, the concept that Solar Cities is applying that will make it successful in a way that previous solar projects have not been?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I should say that most people don't realize how much the cost of solar panels has dropped. They used to be about $4 a watt 5 years ago. They're now about $1.20. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge drop. And there's obviously this sort of threshold where when solar power is cheaper than conventional electricity, that's a massive inflection point. And electricity costs vary across the country. So you'll see it starts to be better in some places, then a small number of places, then a medium, then eventually most places, right? Which I think is what will occur. And I'm not saying solar power will be everything, but I think it'll probably be at least a plurality, maybe a majority by the midpoint of the century. And most of what Solar City specifically is focused on is actually balance of system. Solar City does not make the panel. Solar City is it's kind of like, say, Apple or Dell, where they design the system appropriate to a particular house or office, and they'll do the installation, wiring, the inverter, permitting, and after-sales service, which is about 70% of the cost.
And since I've come from DC only today, where any discussion of solar involves Solyndra scandal, right, government policy,
yeah,
et cetera, what should the government be doing, if anything, about solar now?
Yeah, well, I think the Solyndra thing is somewhat overblown. It's obviously become political football, but not a very good one. I think Republicans should pick up, and I'm sort of moderate, sort of half Republican, half Democrat, if you will, but I'm somewhere in the middle. I guess I'm sort of socially liberal and fiscally conservative, which I think a lot of the country is, actually. Yeah. But the thing is that if you look at Solyndra, the specific case Solyndra, private investors lost twice as much as the government, mm-hmm, and the investors, the venture capitalists that were involved in Solyndra are some of the smartest venture capitalists out there. They're not fools. So it's difficult to say the government was a fool if you've got some of the best venture capitalists in there investing in it all. It's just startups it's a bit of a numbers game, you know. Right. Typically in Silicon Valley, venture capitalists, if they invest in 20 companies, 1 or 2 will be a big hit, maybe 3 or 4 will be okay, and the rest will not make it. But that's the way it works. I don't think it makes sense for the media to be so focused on Solyndra. There will be other failures too, by the way.
Yes.
It's not,
Right.
yeah.
And is there anything briefly that the government is doing right now that is either helping or hindering your work at Solar City?
Well, probably both, I suppose. But I think probably on balance more helpful than hurtful. And certainly, the case of SpaceX, a lot of credit goes to NASA. Where, I mean, SpaceX wouldn't have been able to get started, and nor would it have gotten to where it is today without the help of NASA.
Right.
So this is very much a sort of a partnership on that front. And then with Solar City, the Solar City actually doesn't gets a little bit on the federal side and a little bit in certain states in terms of subsidies for solar. But those subsidies are actually relatively small these days. They're not very big. They used to be big, but then they've been declining every year. And then the big challenge for Solar City is, of course, to provide unsubsidized power at better than grid costs. That's sort of the holy grail there. And then, of course, Tesla has received a loan from the government. Which is part of why I get these Solyndra questions. But actually, Solar City, Tesla has also raised about twice as much from the private sector as from the government. And if Tesla is to compete effectively against GM, Ford, Chrysler, and others, and those guys are getting massive amounts of money from the government and at near zero cost of capital, and we don't participate in that game, it makes a very difficult job even harder. And so it would be sort of really unwise if we didn't do that.